All right. Happy Friday, everyone. Good morning, West Coast. Good afternoon, East Coast. Good morning, Central Time Zone. It's a lovely day here in Dallas. Yesterday it was 80. Today's the highs in the low 60s, and it's sunny, and it's just pretty darn awesome. So I'm excited to have a weekend. I hope some of you will too. We're getting some people signing on here at the last minute. I expect a light crowd because it's busy season for a lot of the stagers, and a lot of the integrators I've talked to have been pretty busy as well. But we'll get a couple dozen of you, and of course we've got the recording. So, all right, without any further ado, let's start the survival call for February, which is like darn near over. Just remind you, Q&A, there's a question box that you can click on, Q&A on your menu. Feel free to ask a question at any time, pipe right in. Raise your hand if you'd rather just do audio, and I'll turn your mic on and we can have a conversation. That's a lot easier sometimes. And, chat amongst yourselves if you'd like to. As I always do, I'm going to start with what's on my mind, and we had a great webinar yesterday, and I hope some of you could make it, but I hope all of you will watch it offline at your convenience. I don't usually get excited about my webinars, but I thought this one was particularly good. So that means a lot coming from me because I think most of them aren't. So do give it a look. It was called Brand Building for Profit. It's on trstimson.com and avmatters.com now. You can take a look at that. And in that session, and what I want to talk about today before we get to your questions, is the importance of manifesting passion to illustrate your brand. And I talked a lot about passion. I talked about brand imperatives, brand multipliers, things that will increase the value of your brand. I talked about how to pick a brand, how to have a conversation to help you understand what your brand is. I talked about mistakes that we all make when we're trying to use branding as a verb. So definitely a good one to listen to, but I'm going to hit on a couple of the highlights here today and expand on them in a way that is unique to the survival calls. It's not the sort of thing, it's not the kind of conversation we would have on a general webinar or even on a keynote. So, and I'm going to talk about brand manifestos, and particularly I'm going to talk about my brand manifestos so that you can see how to use them. It might generate some great questions from you for some explanations or applications in your business. And then I'm going to revisit the brand diagnostic tool that I use to evaluate, give me a head start on where I need to work on a particular organization when I'm coaching or advising them. So we talked about manifestos in this webinar and how important manifestos are for expressing your passion. And while manifestos aren't necessarily customer-facing or outward-facing phrases, they certainly can be. Manifestos are indications for you and your team on what's really important. What are the things that you passionately believe in? And these passions are what help define your brand more than anything else that you do. You have to believe in something. Okay? If you stand for something and people want what you stand for, then all of a sudden price is less of an object. Okay, so these brand manifestos are important for conveying who we are, where we fit into the marketplace, and the type of customers we want to relate to. So I shared 5 manifestos, and I'm going to go over them with you to see how they apply. So yesterday, one of the manifestos I shared was sell outcomes, not transactions. The next 3 manifestos on the screen say the same thing. So my manifesto is I'm very outcome focused. I want to have outcome conversations with customers. I want to talk about the end result, not the plan. I want to focus on customers and not products. When I'm coaching my clients, this is something we talk about all the time. We talk about how do you move from talking about products to listening to the customers. I had the privilege of working with a major manufacturer earlier this week, on a big product rollout. And I'm dealing with product managers and marketing people and executives, but this is a manufacturer. How do you get manufacturers to quit talking about product? It's an interesting challenge, but once they understood that what they were going after, this initiative, is after a particular segment. They have a product line that is designed and built for a segment that they don't currently do a lot of business with. Their conversation needed to be about the customers. They needed to talk to customers in customer terms, talk about the things those customers are looking for, talk about the problems that they face and how to solve them, so that they could earn the right to talk about products. And once they grasped that, they started policing themselves, and it was fantastic to watch them go through this. All of a sudden, we'd created a spot in the room for product conversation, and when they started talking about product, I'd just go walk over and stand in that spot, and then somebody would say, "Hey, you're talking about product," and then we'd shift the conversation back. And the results were is that we got much farther in a one-day session than I would have possibly have hoped for, because we didn't have all the noise about how we do things getting in the way. We were really talking about what we do for customers. So that's a manifesto. You'll see it in my videos, you'll see it in blog posts, you'll see it in presentations, you will hear it on these calls. You have manifestos as well. You need to figure out what they are, and then how do you talk about them, and how do you have stories that go with them. Manifesto number 2 that I shared yesterday was create capacity continuously. Well, I love this because it's short, it's alliteration, okay? But the way it manifests itself very often is I say things like managers should be working themselves out of a job. Okay, that's a manifesto about creating capacity. When I say you need a process for process change, that's another way of alluding to the fact that capacity is important. You need a way to change the way that you do things and have a process for that, so that you can move more quickly. Management capacity is your biggest constraint. There's another capacity statement. Okay? And a manager's number 1 job is to remove obstacles. Obstacles are capacity constraints. So I talk about capacity all the time, but I don't often say create capacity continuously. I talk about these other things and how it manifests and how it works inside of an organization. You can do the same thing with your clients. You have things that you passionately believe are important to the effective execution of your craft. Find out what those statements are. My third manifesto is don't let perfect get in the way of good. I do say this one all the time. Probably till my clients are rolling their eyes at me. But they usually say, yeah, and they will follow up with one of the other manifestos you see here. And depending on what their particular challenge is, don't manage by consensus, 80% ready, go, stop analysis paralysis, or one of my favorites is progress, not perfection. Okay. In improving a company and achieving growth and profitability, perfect gets in the way of most initiatives. Anytime we want to do something perfectly, we're not going to get there. So we've got to squash perfection as soon as we see it starting to rear its ugly head. We're never going to achieve perfection. Now, I don't think, I did shows for years, and it was always the quest for the perfect show. But we knew we were never going to have one. You never have a perfect show. You may have a great load in, you might have a good rehearsal, you have a pretty darn good show, you hit all your cues, the loadout goes pretty well, but it's never perfect. There's always something that you can improve. And a lot of things are completely out of your control. So perfection is an unreasonable and actually a demoralizing goal, because there's a lot of things that you can't control that are always going to keep you from getting there. So there's a manifesto. All right. The fourth one I talked about was anyone can be competent, be credible. Credibility is really important today. I just attended last week, I was attending a conference of solo practitioner business consultants, other people who kind of do what I do. Some of them are process consultants, some of them do strategy, some of them do employee engagement, human resources. Everybody has different specialties and different markets, but we're all solo practitioners. And we You know, we go to conferences together, we learn techniques together, we talk about our businesses. Credibility is a huge part of what we talk about because the successful consultants spend about 80% of their energy on marketing. Now, I don't think that most of you need to spend 80% of your time on marketing. Heck, if any of you spent 10% of your time on marketing, it would probably be a dramatic improvement in your results. My goal would be that if you're an owner or a principal in the organization, regardless of what your specialization is, sales, operations, finance, about 25% of your time and energy should be connected to the functions of marketing, the thought process of marketing, identifying marketing opportunities, making sure our marketing is on point, on task, the right language, the right manifestos are being conveyed. You cannot survive and grow anymore without marketing, because marketing has no barriers to entry. Everyone can do it, and you can do it very inexpensively. It simply takes time. So credibility, for most of us, is the goal of marketing. Yes, we'd like to find more people. We want more people to know who we are. But do you want them to know who you are because you were noisy, or do you want them to know who you are because you're credible, that you're a viable resource for them? Other ways I talk about this is, seek third-party validation. It's not very valuable when you tell people how great you are. It's really valuable when other people say how great you are. Publish and promote. A lot of resistance to publishing and self-promotion in the circles of clients that I work with. However, the ones who overcome whatever internal obstacles that they've created for themselves and are creating blogs or creating videos, are sharing information, they're teaching the world how to do things better. These are the companies that are getting the most traction. These are the companies that are having outcome conversations with potential clients. These are the ones that are getting people into their building, getting folks in front of their team, and developing relationships before doing business instead of the other way around. And publishing and promoting is how you get your credibility and how you get your manifestos out there. People need to know what you stand for, and here's a way to do it. Another way I talk about this particular manifesto about promoting credibility is get the owner on the phone. I sit in sales meetings and we talk about projects. I help my clients work through, proposals and pitches and, how they're going to present themselves to a prospect. And then invariably there's that moment where the prospect is not responding. The next step is not happening. And we know it's probably because the client's busy, but it's at some point in time we have to do something about it. 8 times out of 10, if I can get the owner, if I can get you to bypass your salesperson or with your salesperson, call the prospect and say, "Hi, this is Tom Stimson, the owner of XYZ company. We're working with you on this project. I wonder if I could have a few minutes of your time. Here's some times that are convenient for me. Can you please call me back?" That phone call works 80% of the time to get the ball rolling again, and it elevates your credibility. Here's the owner. Nobody's more credible in your company, believe it or not, than the owner or the principal, the president, the CEO, whoever that person is. That person has innate credibility. Use it. And the last manifesto I'm going to yammer on about today is you don't get extra points in business for doing it the hard way. This is something I passionately believe. It's kind of what my whole business, my consulting practice is about. It's how I looked at things as a person who ran an operation, ran a sales team. I don't say these exact words all the time, but I do look for variables to eliminate. I stop my clients or check my clients when they're trying to introduce more variables into a commission plan, a customer qualification program, any kind of process. When they're trying to put more steps or more variables in there, they're making it hard. and we talk about that. A lot of doing things the hard way involve getting rid of traditions, and traditions are the nice word we use for the stuff that we've always done, because we've always done it this way. When we resort to traditions, we're creating a harder way to get things done. In other words, we're creating an immovable object which shouldn't be immovable. Now, we can embrace traditions, we can celebrate traditions, but we shouldn't hang ourselves with traditions. And the last one, in the coaching process, when we get hung up on doing things the hard way or not making a change, then I will say, if you choose to do nothing, what will we be talking about next? And I had one of those conversations, well, just this morning, with a client who has a difficult conversation they need to have with a key employee. And we've been coaching this conversation for, oh, I don't know, it feels like 2 years. But the final straw is, what are you going to talk about next? If we don't do this, if you don't have this conversation, where does that leave us? And that finally rung true with him after everything else. So manifestos are important. You live them, you breathe them, they exist in your organization. You should find out what they are. It'd be a great opportunity for the thought leaders in your company. Notice I didn't say management, I said thought leaders, to sit down and talk about what your manifestos are. And you probably have 5 or 7 that you need to embrace and reinforce, but you might sit down and come up with 20. And the bigger you are, the more thought leaders you have, the more manifestos you're going to come up. And you may have manifestos within a division of your organization or a group. You know, operations may have manifestos and sales may have manifestos, and then you've got the corporate manifestos. You know, there are things that you believe in that you need to practice and embrace. So if you have any questions about manifestos or thoughts or any things that you want to share, or if you have a great manifesto, you want to put it in there, I'd love to share it with folks. Just stick it in the Q&A section, and I'll be looking for that. The other thing I talked about was this evaluation tool. It's just a simple 2x2. 2x2s are a lot of fun. They're easy to explain. They're easy to apply. And this one actually works both ways. So we're comparing the brand versus focus, and focus being product focused versus customer focused, and weak and strong brands. And I can look at an organization, or you can look at yourself and say, you know, how is my brand strong? Is my brand weak? You know, do we talk about product, or do we really try and look at things from the customer point of view, and to what degree? And that puts us down into a quadrant, or up in a quadrant, that tells us something about outcomes. If you are product focused and your brand is not particularly strong, you tend to be a proposal mill. And if you're a proposal mill, that tells me what I need to work on in your organization. More specifically, I have to work on management, because that's where the problem lies. It lies in management. If you are customer focused, but you don't have a very strong brand, what you'll find is that the customer tends to be indifferent. You may win the customer over with your focus, but there's not a lot of compelling reason for them to stay there, or they are easily pulled away when a stronger brand presents itself. So you may win the job once, but you have a hard time keeping the customer. They haven't made the full switch to you. They've simply done a transaction with you. Now, for companies that have a stronger brand, but are still product focused, you get into a situation where you may deliver great results in product terms, but the customer experience may be lacking. And what I tend to find is that the customer likes doing business with you, but they have a lot of concerns and a lot of suggestions. In other words, they expect better. We see this in as consumers. We see this when we go to a restaurant or a hotel that has a great reputation, but we don't get the experience that we were actually looking for. In other words, we can't get on board. As opposed to a company that has a strong brand and is very customer focused. And again, think of yourself as a consumer, you want more. You want to spend more time there. You're asking them to do things, say, can you do this for me? Can you do this for me? And, a great freelancer, for instance, we like a great freelancer. They got a great reputation. They're paying close attention. They get engaged and involved in every project you put them on. You start asking, what else do you do? What else can I hire you for? Your customers look at you the same way. And so if they're asking you to do things that you don't do, be flattered. And, oh, by the way, maybe consider doing more of those things because you've got the basic formula correct. So in the diagnostic process, I say if you write a lot of proposals, if you talk about price, if you don't close very often or your close rate is low, then I'm going to take a look at your brand and say it's probably a little weak. You're in that bottom left-hand corner. The customer says you did a great job, puts the project out the bid. Yeah, weak brand, customer focus. There's indifference from the customer. Customer says you're great, but has issues with your communication. They don't like the way you invoice. They don't like the way you close out a job or how you shifted from sales to project management. You're a strong brand, but you're focused too much on your product and how you do things from your perspective. You created a situation where the customer expects better. You're not meeting their expectations. All right. And then, of course, the holy grail where we want to be is a customer asking for things that you don't even offer yet, or maybe you do offer and we simply haven't done a good job of educating the client. So I said this works both ways. Okay. The other way I use this is if I can recognize what the brand and the focus is, it tells me where I'm going to need to work. So bottom left-hand corner, product focus, weak brand. I'm going to start with management. If I'm going to help this organization move into a stronger position for growth and profitability, first thing I have to do is solve the management issue. Okay? Management is my obstacle that I need to overcome. And then we will push into one of the other quadrants, depending on where we can build strength first. If I have an organization where the brand is weak, but they've got the right customer focus, they're trying to do the right things, they're having the right kinds of engagements, then I'm going to work on the sales and marketing. And I'm going to help see what we can do to improve the sales and marketing, which will not only increase our brand, we will reinforce the brand with our messaging. So I've got to hit in sales and marketing as different entities, get them working together to build that brand up. And that'll put us up into the top right-hand quadrant. If I already have that strong brand and we're product focused and we're not meeting customer expectations, then I have to work on operations. This generally an operational is how we do project management, is how we do delivery, or it might be the operations inside of finance, or all of these things that need the most attention. And if we can solve that, then we can work our way over into the top right-hand quadrant. And even if you're in a strong brand and you're a customer focus, that doesn't mean that there isn't room for improvement, because there's an infinite top right-hand corner here. Now this goes out into infinity, and guess what? Your profits and your margins and your growth trajectory increase all along that line. So we work on strategy to try and leverage the strong brand and leverage your approach to customers so that we can grow the right customers profitably. All right. So simple diagnostic, something that you can reflect on in your organizations about where you need to be. This past year, and I won't mention the name of the company, obviously, but I've been working with an organization in the live event space, and came in they're actually a pretty good sized organization, been around for a while, but they're really struggling on growth and profitability. And what we found was their brand was not being properly leveraged. Their brand was weak, and they're very operationally driven. I talk about, what's the profile of a company. I can usually spend 10 minutes in the organization and figure out if they've got a sales profile, a operations profile, or a finance profile. What's the driving force inside the organization? And that's the three-legged stool of business. sales, operations, and finance. And if I have a leg that's too strong or one that's too weak, I got a lopsided stool, we have to build them back up. Well, operationally driven companies tend to keep us over on the left-hand side of the screen. We're definitely product focused. And so we worked on management. And the result was the operations actually ran very well. It was the management that wasn't making the right choices. So we worked on management and quickly moved them into the bottom right-hand corner. It's taken a little bit longer to leverage their brand, but based on the conversations I'm having them with this week, we are just about at the point where we're going to start working on strategy, because we found the most efficient way to bring this organization up to speed, get them working together better for the right goals using the right tools. There's always work to be done in operations. I'm an operations guy. I can always find something to do there. But management, sales, and marketing, now we're working on the business instead of working on the internal cogs of the organization. So I find this to be a great tool, helpful tool for me. Take a look at your organization and see where you might want to be putting some energy as leadership. Oh, look, I put all these fancy graphics in here and I didn't even use them. Well, there you go. All right, well, we've got a nice turnout here today, but not getting a lot of people asking questions, but that's all right. That just means I'm brilliant as I go and no clarification is necessary. So let me get to some of the questions that you folks have sent in over the past few weeks, and thank you for doing this. And some of these are, sometimes they're a little bit wordy, and this one I edited quite a bit and it's still very wordy. Everybody's favorite topic, exclusivity. So the email read, like I said, this is edited. We've been told by a local hotel and conference center that we as a company are not allowed to perform work in their facility. There's an in-house preferred AV vendor. Clients are permitted to use outside AV vendors, subject to all the usual in-house rules and fees. But because the GM of the facility personally does not like us, we are specifically excluded from doing business there. All right, well, I've heard this before. This is, you know, we mess up sometimes, but I've got this extra sentence in here that says, the other item of note is that the facility is on state parks land. And so the GM is employed by the concessionaire who operates the hotel and conference grounds. And so he's asking for suggestions, some ideas about how to deal with this. So I don't give legal advice, and I preface this by saying I'm not an attorney. And I'm not even sure an attorney is necessary here. However, it might be. So here are the three options that I sent back, and that the person who sent the question is working with. This has come up before in venue exclusivity. If it's a publicly owned venue, if it's owned by the city or the county or the state and they've contracted with someone, sometimes the land is leased to a hotel or a convention center or somebody else who builds their own building on it, but it's on leased land. Typically, these properties have to abide by governmental rules and regulations regarding access. And it's not just public access and that a citizen can go anywhere they want, is that they have to treat all suppliers the same way. And many government-owned buildings have to allow suppliers in equally. This happens a lot in convention center contracts, which is why many of us who want to be in the venue business would rather do business with a convention center than a hotel, because the rules are a little bit, it's more of a level playing field, particularly for an outsider. It's very hard to exclude a supplier from a convention center as opposed to a hotel. So I advise them to check on the public access rules, you know, see if there's a county commissioner or city council or somebody that you need to petition for clarification on this application. Sometimes bringing this issue up with the venue when you're having a grown-up discussion about the situation will uncover the situation, so you don't have to go to the government to get a ruling. So that's the that's the unique exception in this particular case. However, there are times where, for whatever reason, the venue has the ability to exclude you or to make it very difficult for you to work on that property. So our next course of action is to leverage the client. Now, not all clients want to be put in this position. Not all of them value what you're doing enough to be put into this position, but sometimes it works. I had the privilege of working for a large, successful national stager. Our clients took us all over the country to do stuff. While we did run into exclusivity on occasion, our projects were big enough that the clients would say, hey, no, this is who we're bringing in, and they could tell the hotel to shut up. You're buying a lot of room nights, you're spending a lot of money on coffee and rubber chicken, you've got a lot of clout. If you're doing small projects, and this is a $5,000 meeting, it's a little bit hard to leverage up against the hotels. But if you have an opportunity to let your client challenge the band or simply make the statement, no, we do our own AV, and this is who we've contracted with to partner with us, that usually that'll bust it at least 50% of the time. And then the third piece of advice I, of course, gave to this guy is just simply, let's put our big boy pants on and go sit down and talk to the general manager, which he had done. And I said, well, then maybe we're not having the right people have the conversation. Maybe a mediator needs to come in, or maybe instead of talking to the general manager, you need to talk to the hotel ownership. One thing I've learned over the years, particularly the stagers, the hotel AV providers, people who have hotel contracts understand that. But those of us who don't or have not worked in that space often don't realize that Marriott doesn't own the Marriott Hotel. Hyatt doesn't own the Hyatt Hotel. There's an ownership group. Generally it's a property play. There are property developers and investors that own the building. And they have decided to use the building for a hotel that they have contracted with Marriott, Hyatt, Hilton, whoever, to operate the hotel. And they can just as easily decide to have somebody else operate it. So when you see a hotel change from a Marriott to a Holiday Inn Crowne Plaza, it's not that Holiday Inn bought the building. It's that the building owners simply moved the contract to someone else. It may be that Marriott left it and the hotel owners had to fill it in with something else. These are the hotel owners is typically who the AV provider or any other third-party provider is negotiating with. It's not the actual Marriott Corporation. The hotel companies like Hilton, Hyatt, Marriott often cannot dictate. There was a time when they did. That's a different discussion. Often cannot dictate who the hotel owner contracts with. Okay, so you need to talk to the hotel owners. That's where the money is. Follow the money. It's the people who own the building who are really calling the shots, not necessarily the GM who might be an employee of the hotel brand. If any of you have more information on that and want to share it, that would be great. This is a great opportunity for me to bring up credibility, because none of the things I just said matter if you're not credible or have disrespected the venue. So if you've burnt the bridge, we've got a bigger problem. The problem is not being able to work this particular gig. The problem is, how in the world are you going to continue to do business if you're not credible in your industry, or you're known for disrespecting the venues that you work in? The other challenge is if your transaction's under $10,000, you lack a lot of credibility. You're at a disadvantage. I recently did a tiny event. I mean, my AV budget was $2,500, but I spent $10,000 on food and beverage. So this is the typical disparity that we're seeing. Your meeting planners are going to spend a lot more in the hotel on things that have nothing to do with AV. And if you're just a tiny piece of that budget, you don't have a lot of leverage. All right. We had a question about an employee handbook, and this is another time to say, hey, I'm not an attorney. I'm not a human resources expert or authority. I have no credentials. What I have is experience. So the question was, and the situation was, they said we updated our employee handbook and we added a non-solicitation section to prevent past employees from contacting our customers. And some employees have refused to sign because it is too broad. What is the norm for non-solicitation? All right. The trend that I'm seeing is companies that have chugged along for years and years and years without maybe even having an employee handbook are suddenly finding they need one. And they're learning this because they're hiring people who have worked at larger companies or more sophisticated companies. They're learning this because they're having employee departure issues, people taking contacts or other things where there was no documentation to even prosecute or write an attorney letter on. So they're encountering a problem. They're going to their attorney, and the attorney's going, "What? You don't have an employee handbook?" There's also a trend where more and more of you are using a third-party company to do your payroll. And part of their value proposition is to look at your best practices and give you support in there. And so they're very often saying, hey, you need to have employee handbooks. You need to have these agreements and conditions set up with your employees. So this is coming up more and more often. Probably I'm having this meeting at least once a month on the average with clients who are either introducing an employee handbook for the first time or doing an update to get it somewhere out of like maybe the 1990s up into the current decade. So here's some, I won't necessarily call them best practices, but here are some things that are known. Okay. If you have an employee agreement, it needs to be separate from employee handbook. So the first thing I want to say is your employee handbook is a set of policies about how you work with employees. It says, here's how we do vacation, here's how you get your health care, here's how you're expected to dress, here's what to do if you have a problem with your boss. These are all policies. It's policies and procedures is what employee handbooks are. Some of us in the past have slipped in non-disclosure agreements, non-compete agreements, and even non-solicitation agreements into employee handbooks to simplify the signature process, get the employees to sign one document that says we acknowledge all of these things. If you take this situation to an attorney, first thing they're going to tell you is that you've got to separate these things. Okay? An employee handbook is one separate document with a signature and basically acknowledges that I read and understand these policies and agree to abide by them. A non-disclosure agreement is a separate transaction with a signature. A non-compete is a different transaction or agreement, and non-solicitation is yet another one. Okay, these all need to be separate from the handbooks, first of all. So non-disclosures apply to information that's not publicly known, and that's a clarification I've had to make to a lot of owners over the years. Some people want it to apply to everything, that you can't talk about or say or do anything about your time working with our business, and that's not actually what non-disclosure says. It simply says that you can't reveal information that is proprietary or is intended to be kept secret or secure. So customer lists, price lists, things like that. Very often these are spelled out in a non-disclosure, and that's a separate signature. Non-compete, we're seeing more and more, often because some of the larger companies who have a lot more attorneys are able to enforce them. Non-competes are notoriously hard to enforce in certain states, like California, and they're even harder to enforce if you're not a salesperson or in management. And then the third thing that makes them hard to enforce is they're more than 1 year. Now, having said all that, I've seen non-competes up to 3 years for salespeople. If I were a salesperson personally, I wouldn't sign it, but remember, I'm not giving you legal advice. Talk to your attorneys. So non-solicitation, which comes up a whole lot more infrequently. It doesn't come up very often at all. And it basically says you cannot contact anyone that the previous employer does business with for a period of time. Typically, these are hard to enforce because you have to spell out who those customers are. The broader you make it, the more you try to cover, the less power the non-solicitation will have. If it does get in front of a judge, they'll say you're being too broad here, we can throw it out. And typically non-solicitation comes with an agreement for compensation. There's a reward for this. So if I'm going to tell a salesperson that you cannot work in this industry for a period of 2 years, and here's what I'm going to pay you upon termination. So there's typically, you have to buy non-solicitation. Otherwise, why would anybody sign it? You're basically asking a person to give up their career and livelihood for the privilege of finding out that you're a lousy employer. So I don't know if I put this on the next slide or not. What did I put? I got some best practices. I just want to slip in right now that, well, I'm a big fan of employee handbooks. I think they're important. I'm all for a non-disclosure agreement. I can see a non-compete agreement for senior executives. Okay. And I can even see a non-solicitation agreement for certain kinds of key executives or certain kinds of sales or business development roles. I'm a much bigger fan of treating people real well and treat them fairly and expecting them to do the right thing. Because enforcing all of these things requires lawyering up. And that's no way to run a business. Your core competency is not hiring attorneys and throwing attorneys at problems. So save those things for stuff that matters. I know all of us have a story about an employee who quit unexpectedly and opened up a competing business across the street and started calling on your clients. Okay. Sure, lawyer up. But punishing every other person you're going to hire for the rest of your business life is, in my opinion, a pretty weak choice. But that's my opinion. All right, some best practices. Handbooks, everybody receives and acknowledges reading it. Good to have. Update it often. You know, get them to acknowledge it once a year. If you update it every year, that's great. Non-disclosures, most people will sign and agree that there's 2 documents that you can get people to sign when you hire them, or that you can initiate on the, you know, as you're moving on. Not going to get a lot of pushback on these things. Non-solicitation, key salespeople, particularly outside salespeople, not order takers, and executives only, and there's got to be some sort of consideration for non-solicitation. Otherwise, you're asking for rejection. And then consult with an attorney, not just an HR resource. HR has some very valuable information and best practices. They don't always apply to specific industries. In other words, they don't adapt well, and they don't have the knowledge of labor laws that a good attorney will have. They have knowledge of labor best practices. And there's some very good HR folks out there, and there's some great companies that provide HR services, but there's no substitute for having an attorney. So those are my best practices on that. Well, that didn't elicit a comment or a question from any of you guys. Is it Friday? Yeah, so, my opinions. NDA addresses most issues. Okay. And this really applies to larger companies mostly, but really any of us, if you hire someone and they say, well, I've got my own computer and my own phone, okay, that concerns me. Okay, that makes it very difficult to enforce a non-disclosure agreement, because the argument is going to be, you know, you're going to have to basically get their computer in evidence in order to have any recourse. So company-owned computers and company-owned cell phone numbers will solve a lot of problems down the road. 6 months non-solicitation is adequate and requires very little expense, but you still have to do a good job of retaining clients. If you're worried about an employee leaving and taking clients, don't blame the employee. It's you. Remember that whole credibility discussion about the owner picking up the phone? If you're not talking to your clients and making sure they understand that their relationship is with the company and not just with a salesperson, you're not doing your job. End of story. Okay, question about software. So it was pointed out to me that I have not talked about software in quite a long time. I've talked about a few things in passing and I know in marketing. But here's somebody who's only been following me for a couple of years, and so they haven't heard me talk about these things. And he says, currently I have MYOB for accounting, Word for quotes and proposals, Excel for pricing templates, another Excel for scheduling. Hey, we all lived here. We were all this guy once. He says, this has all worked well, but we are now growing beyond this, and I'm looking for an online solution that integrates accounting, inventory management, pricing templates, quotes, along with scheduling. He probably should throw in a CRM and a few other things there. In other words, he wants the Holy Grail. So I've had a conversation with him offline, saying that, yeah, you can probably find most of these things, but not integrated accounting, at least not in the way that you're thinking that it works. So I thought it would be a good time to update some of the things that I think are important in software. And I looked back at the last time I did a keynote on software, or we had the software summit in Dallas several years ago. And I've changed my opinion of some things. And so some of these may surprise you. I'm a huge fan of anything cloud-based. If you're not looking at a cloud solution, I think you're asking for trouble. I think the cloud is safe. I think the cloud is vital. I think the cloud is efficient. I think the cloud is reliable. It's also very inexpensive. Almost everything I do is on the cloud now. And there are multiple sync options for the cloud, and I can list all the reasons that you're thinking of why the cloud is not good, and I can counter every single one of them. The only one that's really of a concern is syncing, and people working on things offline and having them sync online at inappropriate times. There's multiple sync options. You can work around that. You need to look at it. If I'm looking at a piece of software, particularly an enterprise software, and they don't have an iOS-based app, in other words, it won't work on my iPhone or my iPad, they don't have an app specifically for that, I'm probably not going to give them due consideration. Having an Android app is meaningless to me because anybody can put an unvetted app on whatever Android calls an app store. I'm an Apple user, so I don't know what you guys call it. If you have an iOS app, which means you've gone through a vetting process through Apple, that's a level of sophistication that gives me comfort. I don't care if you use iOS or not. The fact that somebody produced something for iOS means that they've done the heavy lifting. Okay? This is a mature, viable product. I'm also looking for something that has complete online help and tutorials, training videos. I should be able to completely train on a product before I ever purchase it. And if they make training proprietary, then I'm going to be suspicious. So the more open online help and training is, the more likely I'm going to choose that company. Again, this speaks to their credibility. I like to manipulate data. So whatever data I'm working with, I don't care if it's a CRM or accounting software or rental management software, I want to be able to get stuff in and out using tools like Excel. Sometimes you need to manipulate data outside of the database environment, and this needs to be a given. I've been a LinkedIn user for a long time, and I realized that LinkedIn is an online social media service. But one of the things that I embraced about LinkedIn in the early years was the fact that I could manage my contact database in and out of LinkedIn via Excel. And then they made some bad management choices or strategy choices inside of LinkedIn, and they limited that, and there was a huge user rebellion, and they've recently just restored some of that functionality, and I can now download an entire database of everything I've done, said, commented on, liked, connected to made notes about on LinkedIn. It's fantastic. So all of a sudden, LinkedIn is highly usable again. Which brings me to the next thing that I like is I want to have access to the database. For rental management software or systems integration, any ERP solution, there has been a trend over the past decade to limit access to the data files, to the SQL files or whatever it's running under. This drives me crazy. It makes it hard to get data out and in. It makes it hard to run your own reports. I want access to the data, and so I'm interested in products that do not keep the data in a proprietary system that I can't access. It's my freaking data. So there's my prejudice. I want access to my data to manipulate it differently than what the user interface does. I'm also newly a big fan of annual subscriptions. I used to swear by purchasing software as little as 2 years ago. I rejected all subscription-based software. And guess what? We don't have that option anymore. A lot of software only exists in a subscription base, so I suggest you embrace it. The prices have come down dramatically. We were looking at working with one of my assistants yesterday at Photoshop. Back when we bought last time we bought a Photoshop Lite license, it was like $500 to own that license. And oh, guess what? That software no longer actually works or is supported. And we were very fearful of finding out what the subscription was until we found out that it was as little as $240 a year paying by the month, and much less if you pay 1 year at a time. Now, over the course of 3 years, would you pay more than $500? Yeah, you might. But now the software is more likely to be updated and supported. Okay. And Matt has shared a suggestion with us on software. Says make sure whatever software you choose allows easy forms customization that you don't have to pay extra for. Yes. Also be wary of software packages with apps that only do one tiny function. And I suppose what you're referring to is third-party applications or add-ons or plugins that solve a problem that the software company should have integrated into the software. And yes, I agree with you right now. In 2 years, we might disagree with that because I'm starting to see the trend that these third-party applications and tools and plugins are becoming the norm, and that's how we get features. But I see your point. Evan made the comment that it's important that you can work offline if necessary, and I agree with that as well. So these are all wonderful. That's what I like. Now, let's get back over here to what you shouldn't do. So, as Matt said, you should allow software that chooses easy forms customization so you don't have to pay extra for. And I said what you shouldn't do is pay for customized reports. It makes me crazy. I work with clients all the time that are migrating to a new software platform, and they're working with a software developer, which is a stock software, and paying extra money to get customized reports. Yeah, here's the deal, guys. I look at reports for a living. I look at your reports for a living, and most of your reports are useless. I mean, you don't even use them. So a lot of the customized reports I see people paying for is going to give them something that they've always had, but they've never actually used. So to me, it's a waste of money. The other thing you shouldn't do is try and get the old data from your current system to your new system. And the conversation generally goes like this, was like, well, we have 10 years of quotes. I'd like to get all of them into the new system. That's going to be an awful lot of work when what you can do is keep the old system as an archive and go look something up if you have to. You'd be surprised how quickly you'll get over looking at your historical response, and often you'll come up with a better response if you quit looking at the past. So I don't worry too much about what happens to old data. It's old data. That's what archives are for. Once you archive something, chances are you're never going to look at it again. It makes sense. It sounds logical that we should care about old data What if we need to look something up? What if we've got to find a piece of information? What if we get audited? Yeah, keep the stuff you have to keep. Okay. But let's quit worrying about it. I think it's keeping us from doing the things that we need to do in our business. Managing servers. I had a client who had a crisis the other day, and they're basically they lost a whole weekend with their servers. File server went down, which means they didn't have email and a whole bunch of other stuff. And my response was, "What the what? What are you doing? You've got a file server? This is 2017, for goodness sake." Everything that you run has a cloud-based solution. There's no reason you should have gone down. And of course, they'd already replaced their file server, but it's like, yeah, I get the speed, I get the access, I get the security, but come on. The last thing I don't think you should do is fret about double entry. When you're and the rental guys, you tend to do this the most. You want a software that you build the quote and you do all your work inside the rental management system, and then it automatically ports over to your QuickBooks or whatever. And gosh, you're wasting a lot of energy trying to make that work. And the fact is that porting is inaccurate, inefficient, and impractical 90% of the time. Very few people get it to work correctly. You have to have things set up properly. It doesn't handle anomalies well, and you spend more time not trusting the data and chasing stuff down. Double entry. I mean, I ran a $20 million company, and we double entered. Every invoice I printed in the rental management system got entered into QuickBooks by hand. We survived. It's not that hard. Do you make a mistake? Yeah, you could, but now I've got two systems that I can easily audit and compare. All I have to do is look at the totals. So I think there's a lot of concern that double entry is inefficient, when in fact, double entry used to actually be a best practice if you talk to any old accountants. So there's some things I think you shouldn't do. All right. And yeah, take a screenshot here or come back and watch this later, but here's what I think the average business needs. I'm just going to cut to the chase here because this is a private phone call we're all doing, and I don't think any of my software clients are on the call right now. I think you need a dedicated CRM. I don't think in this day and age where so much of your time and energy is spent on marketing and business development, I don't know how you could get by without a CRM. So the two I've seen lately are Insightly and vTiger, that I think are well suited to small business, as opposed to Salesforce, which is a wonderful product, but really designed for enterprise level solutions. And the main reason is I want to be able to build a pipeline. It's not just about tracking who I talk to and who's a prospect and who's an opportunity and all that kind of stuff. That's important, but what I really care about is the pipeline. I want to know what opportunities that we're developing and what their value is, so I have a sense of what my business is going to look like 6 months from now. That's what's important today. If you're in the rental business, then a labor module is important. I've had several clients lately move to the LassoWorks platform. I know there's other platforms. I also know that a lot of rental management software says they handle labor. But here's something that I think's working. Yeah, would I love to have one giant software that does everything? Sure. But having 4 softwares that work really well is probably better. So having a labor module of some sort, being able to manage labor and labor track and labor project and labor schedule would be valuable. If you're in the design world, particularly systems integrators, you need a D-Tools or something so that you can get from the design phase to the procurement phase quickly and efficiently. If you're rental management, I don't endorse one over the other. They're all good. There's 4 major ones, which probably covers 90% of the market. They're all fine. I did an event not too long, a couple years ago, for a company where half the company hated R2 and the other half loved it. And I had to stand up in front of the audience and in support of management say, get over it. Learn how to use the tool. They're all bad and they're all wonderful. If you're in systems integration, Solutions 360 is a really cool enterprise product, but there's products like DoveNet and others that will help you do the same thing in systems integration that our rental management tools do in rental. Cloud storage, I'm a Dropbox person, but there's so many out there. There's lots of ways to solve this. I found Dropbox is universally accepted, understood. You know, they were the first major one to the market, so they have an advantage. Accounting, I basically only have one answer, and that's QuickBooks. MYOB is great for us old Mac people. I still run into Peachtree, Microsoft Dynamics, and some other products in the accounting world, but the migration to QuickBooks has been pretty pervasive. I have probably 3 clients a year make the conversion. If they're not on QuickBooks, they'll make the conversion to QuickBooks. I think every year for the past 4 or 5 years, I've had somebody make that conversion. And they've all been happy with it. You know, they can complain about QuickBooks, but the fact is it's well supported. Everybody knows how to use it. And they do not pay me to say any of this. All right. So that brings us to the end of the call. You guys, thank you for your comments. I'll remind you, I've got some coaching programs, some other things. Just stop by my website every once in a while, find out what's going on. So I don't have to pound you with emails all the time, but you'll probably get an email from me about that. And you should have this on your calendar so you'll know when the next one is, but you'll get a reminder email to send your questions in and all that kind of good stuff. So thanks as always for joining me. And if you're going to be on the sales and marketing call in 30 minutes, I've got a guest on that call. We're going to talk about them, how they put their website together and their experience. I've seen your websites. You might want to make that call or remember to listen to the archive. So thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.